Hi, this is the book series, and this is the 7th event of the book series. The second one for Portraits of Rhythm. Today is Portraits of Rhythm. There's 5 books in the series that we go through. I started with Stick Control, then we did Portraits of Rhythm, which is the second slot, and then after that, we did, what did we do? Access of Rebounds, right, and then the Syncopation, that read book, and then Joe Morello's Master Studies book. And then I started round 2 again. Last Sunday we did the second visit on Stick Control, and continued on the Stick Control. And today we're going to do Portrait Rhythm. We're going to do Etude number 2. We're only going to do one Etude at a time with Portrait Rhythm. Each one is a deep study in itself. So I think it's plenty to look at on one page. So welcome to the second visit to this book. And I want to continue investigating what Anthony Cerrone wrote in his in this book, which is the newest publication of portraits, which contains a lot of. Okay. The cameras are not responding well. I have to reset the cameras as well, but there's a lot of text in here. You can't see. And he does a lot of explaining about, and teaching. There's a lot of teaching in here to be had as well. So let me fix up the displays very quickly. Not that we need 3 displays for this demonstration, but it's here, so you might as well make it work. All right, so I'm going to read you some stuff that he wrote about music in general. I mean, there's some general instruction in here, and then he gets into specific instruction about the Etude itself. So, I mean, I implore you to get this book. Put it next to, which is an exact copy of Portraits of Rhythm, except it has the extra text explanations and observations on Mr. Cerrone, which is very useful, but I'll go through those with you. Now, I went through the forward and all of that. I'm not going to go over the material we did last time. There's so much material, but I really like what he has to say, and I want everybody to hear it. So I'm going to read it to you. As bad as that is of me. The study of a piece of music for snare drum requires the same elements as for any orchestral instrument. As I discussed in the foreword, musicians deal with rhythm, dynamics, tempo, phrasing, and interpretation. The one element that does not apply is intonation. There's a few things I would not argue with him about, but I think I have a little more expanded viewpoint. I mean, his viewpoint is strictly classical, and my viewpoint is a little wider than that. So I think intonation does, when playing a drum set, I think intonation is very important. There is the consideration of properly tuning the snare drum, not only that, but all the drums. But I will not deal with it at this time. That's good. Let's take a closer look at the area of interpretation. Because of the limited amount of information supplied by the composer, musicians must delve further into the music to determine a composer's intentions. I will be more specific with regards to Etude number 2, but there are some general considerations that apply to all music, and this is why I want to read this. Many pieces are composed with an idea in mind, a storm scene, a tranquil atmosphere, dancing, sadness, marching, etc. Music can express unlimited experiences. However, a great deal of music is not programmatic and will present a more difficult problem in developing the character. Some elements that help us determine its character are time signatures. This indication can change the character of the music. A marking of 4/4 is quite different from cut time, which is 2/2. Also, writing in 3/8 time creates a different feeling from 3/4 time. 2. The tempo marking. This is the one most descriptive element a composer can provide to describe its musical character. If a composer indicates moderato as the tempo marking, the only information we have is that the tempo is moderate. But if the tempo marking says moderato maestoso, we have much more information. This not only says the tempo is moderate, but that the notes must also have a majestic feeling. 3. The rhythms. The type of rhythms used can also help a player determine the work's character. Flowing triplets and non-syncopated rhythms are played differently from dotted notes and syncopated rhythms. 4. Accents. The use of accents is a great help in adding to the work's character. Even more helpful is the composer's use of normal accents, wedge accents, and staccato accents. Yes, there's more than one kind of accent. You can express dynamics and emotion through the accentuation as well. 5. Rudiments, flams, drags, four-stroke roughs, etc. The use of these rudiments for snare drum parts creates a special character to the music. Other instrumentalists are able to create special inflections with their breath, fingers, embouchure, and bowing. Percussionists create these inflections by controlling their sticks and using rudiments. Each of these etudes in portraits and rhythm present different problems within the technical area of performance. Contending with all the dynamic and tempo changes throughout the book demands a certain level of technique. If a technical problem exists in studying one of the etudes, isolate the problem measures and create a technical exercise that incorporates the difficulty. For example, in Etude number 2, the drags in line 11 are very difficult in a fast tempo. Pick out the 2 most difficult measures and repeat them many times until they can be played without stumbling. Once the technical problems have been handled, turn to the more creative part of the study, its musical character. As with any musical work, if the character is not evident, then much of what the composer intends will be lost. The tempo and phrasing have a lot to do with determining its character. Etude number 2 has a metronome. Thank you. Has a metronome marking of 100. And thank you again. Has a metronome marking of 144 to the 8th note and a tempo indication of allegretto. Unfortunately, it does not tell the whole story. Allegretto means quite lively and moderately fast. This in itself is an accurate description of the basic character, but does not say too much about phrasing. The metronome markings may give us more information, but in this case, it is deceiving. The indication is for the 8th note, indicating a pulse on each 8th note. A more accurate marking, however, would be for the dotted quarter note to be equal 48, giving the impression of 1 pulse for each measure, a more accurate description of this character. The problem with an indication of mm equal 48 for the dotted quarter note is the difficulty of practicing with such a slow pulse. That's why I like to practice with very slow metronomic markings, because it forces the responsibility of the time on the player. Beyond the 2 elements just discussed, the performer must determine actual phrasing. In a well-written piece of music, rhythms should also give some evidence of its character. And then he goes on to make some observations about this. Specifically about parts of the music. Well, I'll go through them, but I'm going to have more to say than this. You know, about the other parts of the music too. 1. To execute the forte piano markings in the third and fourth lines effectively. So let's go to the third and fourth lines. Okay, so he's talking about the double P and the FP and the FP and the FP and the okay, he's talking about those dynamic changes. I suggest that in one hand play the forte notes and the other hand play all of the remaining offbeats, with the exception of the 32nd notes, which should be alternated. Which is a very orchestral way of approaching to try to ensure as much as possible consistency of sound by using sticking to support the evenness of the sound rather than trying to do it rudimentally and relying on your technique to execute it evenly. It's a matter of expediency, but if you're a rudimental player, I don't see anything wrong with, and you're capable of controlling your dynamics properly, I don't see anything wrong with doing it rudimentally. Except if you're an orchestral player and you're going to be playing in an orchestra with a conductor or a student or auditioning for an orchestra, or to get into a music school, I would stick to the more classical orchestral interpretation. 2. As a general rule, all soft passages should be played near the edge of the head, and loud passages should be played near the center. However, when there are quickly changing dynamics such as FP in lines 3 and 4, again, he's talking about the same lines, those quick dynamic changes, they should be played in just one area of the head. When the loud and soft dynamics change rapidly, in most cases, use the center of the head. Again, this is a very orchestral approach to playing a snare drum. I choose the area on the head not for its dynamic range so much as for the tonal and intonational qualities. The drum sounds different when you play it at different parts of the head, and sometimes you want to use different parts of the head for different dynamics because there's also a different sound happening, but you should be able to execute the dynamics at any point of the head and express your dynamics without moving around the head at all. Besides being able to utilize the different areas of the head as part of your expression, not only for volume, not entirely for volume, but it can be used for volume, as he suggests, but also for tonal qualities. 3. As discussed in number 2, the crescendo and decrescendo markings in lines 7 and 8 should all be played in the center of the head. I agree with I agree with that. Only if you want the center of the head sound. Now, let me explain to you why I'm particular about this extra dimension of tonality. Is because the overtone series of the snare drum is more pronounced as you get towards the edge of the head, and it's almost completely muffled in the center of the head. So you get a very dry sound out of the center, and you get a very wet sound out of the edge. And that makes a big difference in the tonality. So I wouldn't say that whenever you play crescendos, they should be in the center of the head. Although, you know, if that's the sound you're using, you should stay in the center of the head. But the same attitude, the same approach could be used at the edge of the head too. You could say all the rolls could be at the edge of the head, depending on how you want to interpret the piece. If you want some distance on the sound, if you want to make it sound not so close up, you can go closer to the rim and give it a little bit of room sound, sort of. But you have to be able to have enough of a dynamic range to execute the dynamics, because it's much more difficult to play loudly at the edge. I mean, the edge lends itself to softer playing because of the volume level responses you get at the edge compared to the level response at the center of the head. But the tonality also changes quite a bit. So there's more than just volume in my choice of where I'm going to hit the drum. Four, the dregs are to be played close. This is generally true for all rudiments when playing in the classical style. Again, he's a classical teacher. This is a classical book. His students are being prepared for a classical career. This is excellent advice to somebody pursuing that kind of a career. Then he goes into some interpretations. One, this etude should be phrased with one beat per measure. A slight natural accent is necessary on the first beat of every measure. A musical approach to phrasing the opening 14 measures is as follows. And I'm going to show you this. It's not on the page. A lot of glare on this one. Okay, he's talking about this. You see what he's doing here? Is he's using slur marks. Now these are not rolls. This is more like what a trumpet player looks like, or what a violin player looks at. When somebody who's playing an instrument that breathes, he has to use his breath. You can think of it that way. Whereas the slurs are in one breath, and you take air in the spaces between the slurs. That's what would happen with a trombone, or with a trumpet, or with a flute, or an oboe. They'd be blowing on the slur, and they'd be breathing in on the rests. Not all of the rest, but whenever they were out of breath, they'd have to wait for a rest to take air. And as long as there's a slur, they could not stop the exhaling of air into the instrument. And this creates a phrasing. So what he's showing you is that all of the measures are being phrased. Well, not all of them, but most of them. Most of the phrasing is done in one bar. So it's one phrase to the bar, or one attack, one phrase attack, or one pulse, or one downbeat. So it's, even though it's written 3/8, and it's marked in an eighth note metronomic mark, the feel is in a quarter note feel, a dotted quarter note feel. Sorry. One beat to the bar. And this phrasing that he's giving you is indicating that he wants the phrases to be stated in, one pulse to a measure. As much as possible. Sometimes just two phrases. The more syncopated bars have two phrases in them, because the syncopation forces a turn in the direction of the phrase. That's what syncopation is. It turns the phrase from a downbeat pulse to an upbeat pulse. 2. The 30-second notes in lines 4 and 5 are to be alternated. Do not use double strokes for 30-second notes. Again, if you have really good technique, and this is what I try to accomplish, you really, a listener should not be able to tell the difference between your singles and doubles. That's the goal. Now, if you're performing, the goal is to get the best performance possible. And if your singles and doubles are not unidentifiable from each other, then it's better to use the singles because they're more consistent. But if you're a rudimental drummer and you have great double stroke rolls, there's no reason you can't use a double stroke roll. That sounds the same. That's really all that counts, is the sound. How it feels and how it sounds. If you can duplicate that, I don't care how your sticking goes. In the classical world, it's another strategy. The more important strategy is the performance, which I agree with. I like to bring that performance strategy into other kinds of music. The same kind of seriousness to performance that's brought to the instrument. In the classical world, I would like to bring to the drums in the other worlds of music as well. 3, the sforzando, marking in line 6. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In the second bar, there's a sforzando. No, it indicates the player should reinforce the dynamic above the current level. Since it comes in the middle of a decrescendo, in this case, it should not be very loud. So here's really some of the problems of dynamics is that here you're following one dynamic where you're decreasing your tempo, and at the same time you have to do an attack that has a sforzando attack. So it has to be louder than the notes playing in the decrescendo, but it cannot really take away from the fact that you're decrescendoing, and you're continuing to decrescendo afterwards because you're doing a sforzando, which is an immediate decrease. It's a sudden attack and drop, like a subito almost. And you're headed for a piano phrase, a whole bunch of bars, 3 bars of piano phrasing in that roll. So it's a very delicate moment to control the dynamics with just enough volume to mark the sforzando and yet not take the focus away from the decrescendo, but transitioning the music into a new section, a new phrase, at a different dynamic level than what was going on previously. There's a lot going on there in those 2 bars. 4. The 60 rolls in line 6 must be played using the 5-stroke roll because of the speed of this etude. This is the shortest roll possible. Anything less would be executed as a drag. Well, as a rudimental player, I could say a 5-stroke roll is a double drag, in a way. It's 2 drags in a row with a single stroke. So I don't particularly want to make a demarcation between what a diddle is, or a drag, and a roll. And they're all the same to me. Okay, use a closed orchestral roll and not an open rudimental roll. Again, he's telling you from a classical musician's position that we use closed rolls, not open rudimental rolls in classical music. But if you're a rudimental drummer, there's nothing wrong with you executing it rudimentally. Although I do suggest that there's more than one way to skin a cat, and we should know how to do that. You should be able to play classical rolls, and you should be able to play rudimental rolls, and have a marked difference in the way they sound, so that you can use the right tool for the right situation. There isn't one way to do anything. Interpretation is the key. This is what he's talking about. Interpretation is the most important element. 5. The crush rolls in line 7. Line 7 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. So crush rolls. What he's talking about crush rolls is those rolls with the little dots on top. Now, this is something that most drummers don't see. They don't see this kind of articulation. And this is, again, very musical, melodic articulation for a trumpet player or a violinist or a flute player. It means that the notes are staccato. They're short notes. They're not long, so you don't really hold the notes completely for their full value. And besides that, they're pressed as well. So they're short press rolls or crush rolls, he called them. And they don't have a sticking. They're just sort of like buzzes, I guess, like a buzz on a field drum. Except you're using both. He wants you to use both hands, because it's not a buzz like a field drum. It really is a crush roll. So that's what that dot means to him. And so that roll can be done very differently depending on whether there's a dot there, or there's no dot there, or there's a dash there, which would make it even longer, or whether there's a slur mark underneath it all, which would take away the attacks, except for the entry attack and the stopping of the vibration itself. So his interpretation is a crush roll, which is to mimic the staccato attack of a trumpet, and to undervalue the notes, or undervalue the roll, like giving it one short stroke and using two hands so it gets a very thick buzz. Maybe this. So that would be one crush on him. But he wants you to really thicken it up. Right. So they're rolls, but they're not. There's no end attack. And the beginning attack, there's no accent. It's just as opposed to. Different. A lot of different ways to do this, a lot of different ways to interpret the same phrase. Six, do not alternate flams or drags that follow in sequence, i.e. line 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, a lot of drags there. Oh boy. Again, orchestral players don't really practice a lot of rudiments. I mean, they learn them and they use them, but they're not performance-oriented exercises like they are for field drummers. Play all of them either right-handed or left-handed. This will produce a more consistent sound, and that is the object here. Again, it's not how you do it. It's not how much technique you have. It's how closely can you bring it to the conception of the composer. And using the music as a guide, but even going beyond the music, is you want to express what you think the composer, as much as you can, interpret from what he wrote down, meant. Not an easy task, and that's why the conductor is there as well, so that he can give an overall interpretation for all of the instruments. Everybody's got to interpret their individual part as to what it means, and then the conductor has to coordinate everybody's interpretation into an overall interpretation of his own about the entire piece and what it means. There's quite a lot going on. And then you have the piece. Okay, and that's what he has. That's a lot to say about one page of music, but there's a lot here. Okay, so let's talk. How am I doing on time? Well, not bad. We're a little behind, but it's okay. There's a lot of material to talk about. And that's enough of a lesson right there. I don't even have to play the thing. And at this point, we'll do lesson 2 will be let's play it. But we'll do that now. Testing, testing. How's the mic? Hello. Mic is fine. I don't know what the problem is, Matt. So, I'm not going to get into allegretto 144 or 3/8 as opposed to dotted quarter pulse right now. All I'm concerned about is understanding the rhythm and the dynamics and the phrasing and how they work together. So I'm going to break it down for you. He starts with there's a lot of syncopation involved in here. This is a syncopated, very syncopated piece, even though it's in 3, and it's very subtle kinds of syncopation. The first 3 bars is one statement, and he's using a syncopated rest here and there to break up the phrases, and then he goes into a 5-bar statement that's not as busy and sort of exposes the syncopation even a little bit more. I'll show you what I mean. So the first 3 bars are going to be count it 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so it doesn't sound like it's in 3 because he keeps shifting the emphasis. You know, it starts on he attacks the 1, and then rests, and then he attacks the end of the 2, of the 1. Well, we're in 8, so it's 8, 1 and 2 and 3, and it's what the count is according to this time signature. Right, and he ignores the downbeat on the second measure altogether, and then flows into the downbeat on the third measure. So it's a very strange statement. I'm going to play it over and over again. Okay, that's one statement. Now he's going to respond to that with something not as busy and with a little more sophistication and exposing the syncopation even further. I'll do that again. Very choppy. Choppier than the first section. So now I'll play the 2 together and you can hear how one flows into another and changes the attitude. So the downbeat, the third bar is the end of the phrase of the first 3. So the phrase really is 4 bars and 4 bars, right? So the first phrase is 4 bars, setting up a flowing syncopation, and then the next 4 bars breaks it up more. Very syncopated. Then he returns after responding with a more exposed syncopation. He returns back to the more unexposed syncopation, but adds some quick rolls for the phrasing. Same thing. So you notice he dropped the downbeat on the second bar, just like he did on the second bar on the first line. Right, and then he hit the downbeat again on the third bar of the phrase, like he hit the downbeat on the third bar of that phrase. Right? And there's your, so that's a restatement of the opening phrase with a variation in it. And he's going to do the same thing again with the response. Now he's going to respond with the more open. But quickly, he transitions to an even more syncopated, with a dynamic issue brought in as well. So he moves on to even a more difficult syncopation. But he passes through that response for 2 bars first. Right? Which is the last 2 bars of the response is going to be. And he does, instead of that, he does let's do it a little faster, you'll get it. See, it's very similar phrasing. And then he goes into a subito section where all of a sudden the floor falls out from the dynamic. You're going from a mezzo to a double piano. With a lot of upbeats. And he wants you to play all the upbeats with your left hand. Because you're going to play all the loud beats with the right hand. And it's much easier to feel this with 8th notes going on. So here's another theme altogether. It goes into a 2-beat theme within the 3. But he's phrasing accents to make phrases with the accentuation using accents. Right? And you got to pop them out, but not ruin the subito that's going on. And then he repeats it. It's not a call response, it's a call, but the second call is call with variation. And he adds these 3-stroke roughs with an accent on the first beat of the rough. Which is the same feeling that he did earlier, except now with the variation. Okay? But again, it's subito, which you're going to go into a crescendo, into a loud section that's pretty straight ahead. That's like the second response, sort of, almost, but even straighter. And then you got to bring it back down again. So so your landing on this line is the first really dramatic land of the dynamics. So let me bring it up to that point now and go through everything I talked about, and you'll see how it's constructed. And now we're at the point where we're at this sforzando that he talked about. We're going to hit a press roll with an accent, but not with a big accent, just with enough to bring it above the diminuendo, and bring us into a softer press roll, which is also going to drop down again in volume for the next series of for the next phrasings, the next theme that he's going to bring in, which is also going to be a syncopated theme using rolls, using what he wants you to do is his 5-stroke rolls. But they're in syncopation, in a syncopation phrasing as well. A lot of syncopation in there. Yeah. So let's you need to practice these dynamic changes. So let's go from the forte. Oops, sorry. All right, let me make the change into the roll. Okay, so this very, very subtle. This piano is the softest, well, almost the softest. It's louder than the double piano, but it's still pretty soft, and they're very delicate rolls. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Then you're into a mezzo immediately, and you're going into these crush rolls. And you can see how he's repeating the earlier themes, right? The third line from the bottom. That's that last one. That is the same rhythm you used in the opening measure of the second line. Right? Except it's got 2 drags and an accent. Instead of the... Right? And the beginning of the line reminds me of the third line. A variation of the third line theme that he brought in the middle of the line, the third bar of the third line. Right? There it is again. Slight different. It's changed the rhythm a little bit, but it's the same kind of phrasing. And then he goes into the more straighter thing again, you know. And that's like the first. He leaves out the downbeat like he did in the second bar of the first line. All right, does it again. And then the out chorus. So let me do the whole thing for you. I'm going to do it. 1, 2. What is 144? I don't know if I want to do 144. I don't want to really press my technique because I want to be able to execute it for you. I'm not going to be working on the phrasing at. Actually, this is not that bad. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So he wants you to feel it like this, even though it's a allegretto. One, two, three, 1, 2, 3, 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2. That's what he's talking about. Well, that's at tempo. You can even push that tempo, really, but you could do much. I would do it much slower. Okay, so what I would like to do now, I actually did a recording on a snare drum of this a long time ago. Years ago, before I put a lot of this work in my hands. But it didn't matter. You don't need you don't need really great technique to do this. You just need to be able to control it. So let me find this video. Hang on a second while I locate this video for you that I want to show to you. Computers. So this is Etude 2 portraits. Huh. That's 7. Where's 2? Two. Can't find it now, unfortunately. Is this it? Yes, it is. Okay, here it is. The tempo's a little slow on this, so I was really doing, I was sight reading and trying to do performance at the same time. Let me shut this down. This would be a good way to close it because you'll get a really an idea of how I interpret it anyway. Again, this is my interpretation of this piece of material. I studied classical music, but that's not how I spent my career. Let me bring this up and see what it looks like. I'm going to take the microphone off so we don't get any feedback. I can put the mic on because I'm not going to hear this. I'll just play it for you. But this is the Etude. I did this on the DVD with Billy. He called me up and told me to bring the book and the snare drum and that. And I was actually, I mean, I not the first time I ever saw the thing, but I didn't. This was not prepared. I was basically just pulling out the book and doing it on camera on the spot. All right. Well, that was that was my interpretation on a snare drum of that. Some people like it, some people don't. I didn't even check the tempo against the metronome marking. I just did it however I felt it at the moment. I'm trying to make as good a rendition as I could do without any preparation. So that's Etude number 2, and that was Anthony Cerrone's viewpoint on it and my viewpoint on it. The basic thing to understand is that there's interpretation involved, and the interpretation can go a lot of different ways on the same music. Whatever's on the page really does not tell you what it is. It's an indication. Of some information about what it's supposed to be, descriptively in notation, musical notation, in Italian terms, and mathematical, metronomic, tempo markings, whatever they can do to give you an idea of what's supposed to be going on. But ultimately, what is supposed to be going on needs to be determined by the person playing and injecting their interpretation of what they're seeing, which is part of themselves. And some people do more of that than others. Sometimes you're called to do less of that than more of that. Sometimes you're called to do more of that than less of that. But you need to be aware of the different ways of interpreting music and making comprehensive choices according to what's on the page, what you're hearing other people play, and what your sense of what the composer was trying to execute or express, along with what that means to you. Somehow that happens, and it comes out as music. Good luck. So thanks for listening to this babble at times. You don't have to agree with me. You can disagree with me, and you can certainly have your own opinion about all of it. But this is one way to look at it, the way I looked at it, and it might help you with the way that you want to look at it. Help you look at it in another way that you may not have thought of. And hopefully you can bring that to your playing. What you learn about music here on this page, trying to execute it and express what you think it is, or how you hear it, to take that to the drum set so that whatever you play, even if you're playing a cover tune, hopefully it sounds like you, because it's your interpretation of that music. Because there isn't one way to play anything. There isn't one way to play any tune. There isn't one way to play any rudiment. There isn't one way to play any phrase. It's all up to us to express ourselves through the interpretation of what we see and what we hear and what we feel. And the more control we have over our instrument, the more fluid our communication is between what we feel and what is impacted on the people listening to it. So we want to get as clear as we can about our physical ability and as clear as we can about our intellectual interpretation of what we're trying to do. You should have an idea of what it sounds like before you play it. Otherwise, it's going to sound like you don't know what it is. Okay, that's enough. Okay, I'm leaving. Thanks for watching. Join after hours streaming, online streaming on Sue, if you'd like. Join that network. They present these. They present the channel for me to use here. There's also a group called the Art of Drumming Group on Sue. It doesn't have a network, it's just a group. You need to be a Sue member in order to see or join that group. And they sponsor the drum events on the channel. There's other groups that sponsor other events. There's a Music History 101 group that sponsors a jazz hour every week. That's also on the archive if you can look at that if you like jazz. That's some good information about the artists that are being presented. And if you don't want to join the After Hours streaming network on Sue, you can join my network on Sue by using my short code. Short code is what's after the slash on the name here. That's the location of the social network, and this is, you get around that book. And that is the short code. My short code is Zetzer. Z-E-T-Z-E-R. And you put that in front of this / and you wind up in my network when you join. And I'll certainly give you all the assistance I can for acclimating to the network and join the group, and you can continue addressing all of this material that I'm trying to put together. So, other than that, I think I'm done. I just want to remind you again, of course, that, you got to keep practicing. Okay? Not going to stop now, huh? Keep practicing.